Hello, welcome back to the show.
Hello, Mover.
We've got a special guest, Mr. Bruce Webb. Hello, sir.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's awesome. And you've got quite the career that we're excited to talk about. Currently with Airbus helicopters, but you've been flying for over 40 years. Check out his website. What's it called?
The website is website aviation.
But WEBB SIGHT. We were talking about that. And he's also the host of Push to Talk podcast. So welcome. We're excited to have you. How's everything going?
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Awesome. I continue to do the things that I love, which is honestly things like this. Although this is my first appearance as a guest on a podcast.
Wow.
So thank you for the invite. And I'm proud to be a part of your podcast.
We will try to make it a pleasant experience, asking all the tough questions. But Doug, how you doing, man? Doug in the back.
I'm good, thanks. Not everybody else.
Perfect. A lot of stuff. And then Gonky from his deployed location.
Yeah, it's a new background. This is a different office for Valley Design that they're letting me use. So I thought the lighting would be better, hide my wrinkles. But yeah, thanks, Mover.
And I'm just hoping. Yeah, I'm just hoping that nothing crashes on my computer today. This is my only goal because we're excited. You know, we were talking before before we started with Bruce, and it's like the 6 degrees of the La Rosas. And Bruce, we'll get to that in a minute, but Bruce has done helicopter flying with Hollywood, which is awesome. So we're gonna talk about that. But first, Bruce. Well, before we even get started, we want to say that we're thinking about the folks in both North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, and soon to be Florida.
Yeah.
It's this hurricane that's coming is a monster. So we hope everybody's being safe and getting their preparation done now.
Yep.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about hurricane ops here later on and how helicopters have played an important role. But Bruce, you've been a helicopter pilot your whole career. What got you in aviation?
Bad judgment.
All right, roll the credits. That's all you need.
That's right.
That's the answer we've ever had so far.
No, so I'm a farm kid. I grew up on a farm, and I just always wanted to fly. I mean, that was from a young person. I can remember sitting in front of the old black and white TV. I mean, I'm 60, so a black and white TV. And I would put a kitchen chair down on the floor, and I would sit on the back of the chair with the bottom of the chair as my back, and I would have a box fan in front of me, and I would be flying along, with Jimmy Stewart or John Wayne.
Awesome.
And
awesome.
I just always wanted to be a pilot. I really never thought it would be possible, quite honestly. Yeah. But circumstances happened, and I was able to get a demo flight in a helicopter. And I think because, again, I was a farm kid, and as such, machines were kind of my thing. I mean, I'd driven everything, right? Bulldozers, combines, backhoes, tractors, you name it. We had it, we ran it. So when I went to the airport to fly a helicopter, I went there with a 17-year-old kid's attitude. And I remember this man came out, and I talked to him a little bit, and he showed me the helicopter, and he said, well, let's go fly. And I forget, we flew like for 15 or 20 minutes. And I remember at the time thinking he must have been 90 years old, but he was probably 40, right? And
I love it.
So he's telling me all about how to fly a helicopter, and I'm like, okay, just get in and let me show you what I can do.
Oh yeah.
And I got my ass handed to me. I mean, I couldn't. This happened in Illinois, about 50 west of Chicago, and I couldn't have kept it in the state of Illinois. So that's really what kind of hooked me, because I couldn't do it. I'm like, wow, I've got to learn to do this. So that's really how I got my start.
What kind of helicopter was it? Like a Hiller, or what kind of?
Is a Hughes 269C, commonly called a Hughes 300.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But a Hughes 269C, or in the military, they used them for trainers post Korea into the Vietnam area, and they were TH-55s, training helicopter 55s. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Did you guys use any kind of aviation around the farm?
No, well, not then. We didn't use any. In fact, I'm the only person in my family, prior to and subsequent of me becoming a pilot.
Okay.
But one of the first jobs I had, because no one would hire a year-old kid with 150 hours, was crop dusting.
Yeah.
So
Oh, okay.
fate would have it, I actually did spray our farm.
Oh, that's awesome.
And not as a BS, dad trying to help me. I mean, in fact, we had to squeeze him in to be able to spray because we were so busy. So,
I was gonna say, was that did you have to land on the truck? Was that the whole thing? Oh, crap.
We had a semi and it was cut and stretched, and we had a 250-gallon fuel tank on the truck, and then a 1,500-gallon freshwater tank, and then a 400-gallon mixed tank at the back. And it was kind of tiered. In other words, we landed on the top. So when I hit the truck, I landed on the top perpendicular to the truck. So we just had a structure up there. And then the person who would put chemical on board the helicopter, he stood where his head was about the same level as the deck. So he was below, he was down here. And it looked like a candy cane. So when I'd hit the truck, he'd put the candy cane down into the tank. There were two tanks, but they cross-fed. And he'd blow in 40 or 50 gallons of chemical. And it will only take maybe, I'll say 40 seconds. And then he'd shut it off. Candy cane came out and I was gone.
Wow.
And,
so you got that job with like 150 hours. Then, I mean, it seems to me you get a ton of experience doing that kind of flying.
Really. I had a friend, a gentleman who actually was one of my instructors. He started the company and then I started flying with him. Awesome. And so I'll back up a little bit further. When I was in high school, I went to A&P school in high school, which was kind of unique.
Yeah.
So I had a maintenance background when I started flying. And so, if you're going to fly helicopters and you're going to be kind of a one-man band, or in this case, a two-man band, you better be able to work on them. So we'd fly it all day and work on it all night, and then fly it all day and work on it all night. And I'm not advocating that. That was a 269C as well.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Wow.
Yep. And because it was a jettisonable load, because, we had dumps on the chemical tanks, we could fly 100 pounds over gross. Well, the ship was barely able to fly at gross, but rest assured, we flew at 100 pounds over gross all the time.
Wow.
And you're right. I was just mentioning today to someone, I was actually recording a podcast today earlier. And I was mentioning that just from a pure stick and rudder standpoint, I'm sure that's the best I ever was. I mean, for that 6 or 7 year period.
Yeah. Because all low level, and I mean, kind of, don't hit the ground or the truck. I mean,
yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
now, we have a friend that flies ag, but he's in an air tractor.
Yeah.
He's hit trees. He's hit a lot of things. Did you hit anything? Did you have any emergencies? Did you have any scary situations with doing that in your early days?
So let me first preface all that I'm saying. So I work for Airbus, but everything I'm saying is my own opinions. I'm expressing my opinions and my views. This is not sanctioned by Airbus. But I guess the answer is, I don't know that I had, there are a few things that stick in my mind. One, we were spraying, and when we're spraying, it depends upon you change the nozzles in the booms based upon how many gallons per acre you're spraying. You don't change the pump. The pump's running at the same velocity. So a few things, when you want to change from 1 gallon to the acre, let's say you're spraying Saigon on spider mites, you're spraying 1 gallon to the acre. Or maybe you're spraying vegetable crops and you're spraying Coside at 15 gallons to the acre. And now remember, this was, gosh, guys, this was 30 years ago. But anyway, but a few things stick in my mind. I did drag my boom through a tree one time. I mean, you come up and you roll, and you're typically not rolling past 90 degrees, but sometimes if you lose your target, you may roll to 110, 120.
In a
So
helicopter. Wow.
to find your target to get back in the field. And at the time, we weren't using electronic flaggers. Remember, this was in 1986, 87. There was no such thing as GPS, and LORAN wasn't even a thing.
Right.
So everything was just manual. When you were spraying and you had the chemical ran out, you had to mark your spot mentally. Okay. You'd line up two objects at the distant end of the field. You'd look sideways laterally and and then you'd go hit the truck, and you had to come back and hit that spot again. And farmers are very, very bright people, contrary to what some people think. They think it's like, ma and pa kettle. It is not.
Right.
Farming, even then, is super sophisticated. So let me tell you, if you missed, the farmers were not happy with you. So there was no missing.
Wow.
Anyway, so a couple things. I was spraying one day, and you guys, I don't know. I don't fly fighter jets, but I do believe no matter how gain the activity is, if you do it repetitively enough, it becomes kind of mundane. So, we're flying, we'd be spraying. Typically, the skid height depends upon what we're spraying, but probably between 5 and 6 feet above the surface, and we're doing 70 knots. Depends upon how many gallons an acre, but 70 knots at 5 feet. I was flying one day. I'm coming across the field, and to be honest with you, I'm probably half asleep. I mean, I've been flying all day. And so a deer jumped up in front of me. So I was spraying soybeans, and this deer jumped up, and she couldn't have been more than, 30 feet in front of me. In fact, I overflew her before I could make any flight. She jumped up, I saw her, and in that millisecond, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to die from hitting a deer. And that's going to be the strangest accident report ever. But as fate would have it, she moved laterally enough when she jumped that I went right over the top of her. So that was fortuitous. We had a faux pas once where so about every fifth time you hit the truck, we put some fuel on board as well. So, you hit the truck, you put the chemical on board, and you'll increase the chemical load with every hit until you put fuel on, because we make money spraying. So every gallon you put on board. So like at that fifth hit, you take the most amount of chemical, but when you came back for that next hit, you had to take less chemical because now you had to get some fuel. I don't know. We had a little miscommunication. So I got fuel and a full load of chemical. And so, and mover, this. So I'm, you're 12 or 13 feet above the ground, and you got the RPM wrapped to the top. It's a piston powered helicopter, and you push it over the side, and as you fall, you obtain translational lift and you fly away. I pushed off that truck, and that engine went, ugh. So I'm trying to get every ounce of RPM, and we always parked in a way we had some clear way if we could. So I'm over an oats field, and I'm not exaggerating. I say I was under 2 feet for a quarter mile. I couldn't get out of ground effect, but I couldn't stop either. Commonly, and Gonky, you can't just stop in a helicopter. People think, oh, well, you just stop and hover. Not at those weights. It will not hover.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can stop by crashing, So fortunately for me, I was able just to get enough airspeed, just to get out of ground effect, and but the whole time, of course, the guys are back on the truck like, what's he doing? And we're talking on the radio. I'm like, what did you do to me? Right? Anyway. So I found a place to squirt the chemical out. But the reality is, when you do things repetitively, it's easy to make an error.
Yeah.
And we're all human.
Yeah.
And I say all the time, just because you've made an error does not mean you're not a great person or a great pilot. It just means you made an error.
That's
so
awesome.
Fortunately for me, my errors to date have not caused me or anyone else any harm. But I think it's easy to slip into that mindset of castigating or criticizing others. When if you just step back and look at yourself, I think every aviator's been within a hair's breadth of calamity.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
Yeah.
On more than one occasion. So
Sure.
what was after, how did you get out of the ag business and move on? Like what was next for you?
Sure. Well, really, we did. So that first year, so we bought this helicopter. It was a jalopy. I mean, that ship was about as airworthy as a rock, but it was airworthy, but it was barely airworthy. So that first season, we spent about 45 days straight spraying. And that paid for that helicopter and allowed us to virtually buy another one with those 6 weeks of spraying. So then we started doing flight instruction, power line patrol, traffic patrol, anything, quite honestly, anything for $1 if it was legal.
Santini Air. You're just Santini Air and Airwolf. Yeah.
Exactly. So we did that, grew the business. We started flying turbines. We got a Jet Ranger or maybe a Hughes 500 first. I can't remember. But at some point we had C model 500s, D model, E models, 206Bs, B2s, B3s, Ls, L3s, L4s, L2s, L4s, L1s and L4s. I'm sorry. And then, at some point, BO 105 and Augusta 109, just
109.
Wow.
That thing's like 160 knots, isn't it? A pretty fast little helicopter.
Yeah, it wasn't quite that fast, but a 109 is very narrow. So that's what gives it its speed. So we were operating a 109A Mark II wide body.
Okay.
I can't remember my wife's birthday, but I can remember it was a 109A Mark II wide body. Anyway, they're certainly a solid 140 knot ship, but they're small. I mean, they're small. In fact, since you brought that up, I have my first charter in that helicopter. I won't say the company, but I picked them up in Milwaukee and I was bringing them back to Chicago. So if you're familiar with how that ship is configured, it's got retractable gear, but how the doors work for the main landing gear, the doors open out, they hinge at the top and they open out, and then the wheels come up and in to the fuselage. Mm-hmm. So when you raise the gear, the doors go out, the wheels come up, and then the doors shut. And of course, it's club seating, so there are 2 people facing aft in the back of the helicopter. So I've got a full boat. I've got 7 packs in this thing. I take off out of Milwaukee, and as soon as I lift, and I've got just enough gas to make it to Meigs because I've got a full load of people. So I've got just enough gas to make it to Meigs with my reserves. And I take off. I'm coming out of General Mitchell Field, and a guy in the back yells, "Something just fell off the helicopter." I'm like, oh no. So I key up the mic. I call tower and say, "Hey, I'm me, you're you. I need to come back and land. Do you need anything?" "No, I don't need anything, but I just need to come back and land." So I kind of turn around gently, gracefully, because I'm heavy. And when I put my wheels back down, the guy in the back says, "There it is again." Now I know what it is. Yeah. But I don't have enough gas now not to stop to get gas. Seriously. I mean, I think it's hard and Mover, you must have already experienced this, but Gonky, I don't fly airplanes, but I remember I was coming back from, I was flying a 155 in Ireland. We sold an EC-155 to Wayne Huizinga, the owner of, he owned the Miami Dolphins, the Florida Marlins.
Yeah.
Blockbuster Video. He's the original founder of Waste Management. Super guy. Wayne Huizinga and his wife, Mrs. H. I don't even remember her first name. Anyway, I was coming back from Shannon, Ireland on their BBJ. And I just asked the guy flying, and his name is Dave. I won't mention his last name, but a fantastic guy. And I said, "What's your alternate?" We were going to Fort Lauderdale International. He said, "The entire North American continent."
Anywhere you want to go.
Good answer.
In a helicopter, IFR, your alternate is like the next airfield over.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm being a little silly, but not really.
Right.
So, helicopters, when we take off, we're already out of gas.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but that's what makes them fun and challenging.
We're gonna get Gonky flying helos before this is over.
Yeah,
Bruce, that
already
reminds
selling
me of flying the C model Hornets off the boat. Like I was below the minimum fuel I needed to come back, unless I took off last in the launch sequence. So yeah, it's like,
that's comforting, isn't it?
yeah, it's like I'm gonna wait until everybody takes off, then I will.
Wow.
But
So-
it is true. I think that's what, if we're honest, isn't that what we all love about aviation? Because
Yeah.
it's not easy. It looks easy. And in fact, I believe that what most of us like is the ability to make a very difficult thing look very easy.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Look good, sound good on the radio. That's all you need to do.
I can still make
the
it
only
look hard
rules.
sometimes. Don't worry.
Only to people who know what they're looking at, Gonky.
That's true.
The rest
That's
of the
true.
world has no idea. If they knew the helmet fire going on in the
Oh,
front of the
dude.
cockpit
That's
of
right.
your Airbus,
That's right. No one flies
A320,
with me.
do you fly 320? Do you fly 320? Yeah.
On occasion, yeah.
Yeah.
Great
yeah,
airplane. Flies like
Yeah.
a fully loaded Super Hornet.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You probably know more about it than I do, but my
Ooh.
recollection is when we talk about I'm talking about the Sullenberger, the Miracle on the Hudson.
Yes.
What impressed me so much about that was, Jeff Skiles, he was the first officer.
Yes.
Skiles. I believe that was his first ever real flight in a 320. He had just got out of the simulator. He'd transitioned from another ship. I could be wrong, so someone will fact check this. But Skiles was an interesting person, and Sullenberger, at least when I talked to him, he really credited Skiles for how well that went because he'd just gotten out of the sim. So, I mean, they were just knocking that checklist out of the park. And
Yeah. I know he was a captain previously, and like that was the slow time.
yeah, he was.
He had, like you said, I think maybe he had come from the left seat of something, just got out of the sim to basically downgrade to FO.
Yeah.
This
was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And since you fly this, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe, no, it's not a challenge.
Yeah, where's Wombat?
Wombat,
But I
please.
believe when we were talking, I had the opportunity to spend about a week with Sullenberger. So it was very interesting,
awesome.
him and his wife. So I believe, and I could have dreamt this up, but I believe that the ditching valves on that are electric and they did not close the ditching valves.
Correct.
And that's one of the reasons it sank so fast, because people say, oh, it didn't sink fast. Oh, no. That ship could have stayed, above water for a long time, but those electric ditching valves weren't closed. And so it sank a little quicker than maybe it wouldn't have. But, in the scope of things, that was a pretty incredible landing.
Well, not only the landing, but even from the helicopter perspective, NYPD had their search and rescue team on site within it's like 6 or 7 minutes. And
yes,
those helicopters were there, and that saved a lot of lives.
Oh,
itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And the boats. It's funny, Sullenberger, and forgive me because I may not have all these facts quite correct, but I believe I recall when he was telling the story to a group of us that one of his biggest problems was when everyone was out of the ship and rescued, so to speak, they were off the wing of the plane. They couldn't account for everybody because so many people went in different boats and some went to New Jersey, some went to New York. So they're trying to figure out, where are all the people? But the funniest thing he said was when this happened, he called, I don't know if it's dispatch, you'd know, Gonky, but he called dispatch and said, hey, this is Sully. And the guy who answered the phone, he knew the guy. I don't know how well he knew him, but he knew him. So it'd be like me calling, hey, Mover, this is Bruce. And Mover, the dispatcher, said, hey, can't talk now. I got a plane down in the Hudson, and hung up on Sully. Seriously.
We got an emergency in progress. Call back when it's important.
So Sully called back and said, don't hang up. Don't hang up. It's me. I'm the guy down in the Hudson.
Well, it's cold. It's so cold.
Yeah.
In fact, it's funny you say that. Skiles, I've never met Skiles, but I think that was his comment. Someone asked him, a reporter, what would you do differently? And he said, I'd do it in the summer.
Yeah, that made the movie. That's the end.
Did it? Was that in the movie?
That's the end of the movie. That's so cool. Yeah, that's a different world there.
Yeah. And the other funny thing, he called his wife when he was on so after he got a hold of dispatch and told him whatever he knew, he called his wife. And I can't remember exactly what she did, but like commercial real estate or something. I don't remember exactly. But he called his wife and he said, "Hey, sweetie," kind of tongue in cheek. He said, "I'm not going to make it home tonight. I'll call you when I get a chance." And he hung up, assuming that she has seen the news and she knows what's going on. She didn't see the news. So he got to the hotel he was going to spend the night at the New York or New Jersey, and she still hadn't called him back. And he's like, "What's up? Why hasn't she called me back?" And, it was because she didn't know there's a problem. Pretty funny.
He thought he was on a trip still.
I'm not gonna
bother him. And how did you meet him?
So Airbus, we have done in the past, and really, I don't believe it continues because Baron Hilton passed away probably now 4 years ago. But Baron Hilton would be Conrad Hilton's son. He was the hotel magnate that started the Hilton hotel chain, and Baron was his son. And of course, Baron would be Paris's grandfather. So anyway, Baron was a huge aviation enthusiast. In fact, he was a helicopter pilot. He owned a C Model 500. He owned a Beech 18. He owned a Citation 10. He owned a bunch of balloons. He owned all sorts of stuff. And he had a ranch. It's right up against Walker Mountain, about 45 minutes southeast of Reno by helicopter. So if you leave Reno in a helicopter, or any aircraft, I guess, if you leave Reno and go south, you're going to come over Virginia City. That's on a hillside. Then at the floor is Carson City. And then about 20 more miles out is a town called Yarrington. And then that's the last civilization really for a long time. But out in the middle of this, 500,000 acre ranch was an airport. It's either the Flying M Ranch. And the airport is, I guess, Flying M. I don't know. We didn't land on the airport because we're helicopters. We landed right at the ranch. But every year we would take 3 or 4 helicopters out there, and we would spend time with, we were really the transportation from Reno Airport out to the ranch. And then quite honestly, we were kind of the entertainment once we got out there. So we would, if you guys were out there, we'd be flying with you, doing all sorts of fun things up in the mountains.
Oh, cool.
It was a fantastic time. So Sullenberger was one of the guests one time.
That's really cool. So before Airbus, you had the company with the 109 and the other helicopters. I mean, how long did you do that before you moved on?
So it was my wife and I, we've been married 39 years. So it's been a long time. So
awesome.
we had the company, and we had partners in the company. And so it was 2 couples, and we were both pilots and both mechanics. And so for me, it was about the 7.5 year mark. We'd had our first child. We were getting ready to have our second child. And, really, it was just, I hate to say it's too much work because I loved it. But I mean, I was not a typical. For that period of time, I worked 70.2 hours a week for 7.5 years.
Yeah.
So, you can't have everything, and you can't be a husband, a father. You just can't do it all. And so, it was time to make a decision anyway. Ultimately, we sold the company and took about 6-7 months off. And then I started flying medical helicopters. And then I flew medical helicopters for about 5 years. Flew VFR and IFR BKs, BK 117s. And love that. That's probably the most gratifying flying that I've ever done as a business was medical helicopters. It's unique, and you've already experienced this, I'm sure, Mover. When you fly a medical helicopter, you're welcome everywhere you go. Everywhere.
Yeah.
When you're not flying a medical helicopter and you show up in somebody's backyard, there's usually a Gladys Kravitz somewhere who's going to complain.
Yeah. Yeah. Were you doing night vision goggles in the EMS world?
So no, when I was flying EMS, NVGs weren't even a thing, not civilly. And so I have flown goggles. I've done work with goggles, but not EMS.
So this is all pitched out, just whatever your landing light can see as you're in some dark places.
Yeah. And you know what? But it does, again, back to that skill set. You learn some pretty good tricks, right? I mean, I remember one night, this is in West Virginia. I was landing on a road in West Virginia, and it was really contrary to the winds. I could have had a headwind, but I chose a crosswind because I could see the road, and I know there's hills down there. If you'll call them mountains, but they're not that big. But anyway, I didn't shoot the approach in there to land into the wind. I shot it to run down the road. And it was interesting. And you've been in these mountains before, or these hills where, there's maybe a 200 foot deep cut. And when I landed, I was in a 200-foot deep cut. And you couldn't see that, but coming in over the road, as long as I knew I was over the road, I was not going to hit the surface. So, anyway, you learn a lot of little tricks, I suppose. You soon learn, especially in those mountainous areas. And again, I hate to call them mountains. It's not like the Andes or the Himalayas or even the Rockies, but you can get yourself in trouble by landing with a foggy condition where you can't get back out. You can see the EMS, the first responders down in the valley. It's fog, it's shrouded in fog, and you can look down and see them. But if you land down there, you can't get back out. Oh, wow. Not legally nor safely. So anyway,
Bruce, did you end up later in your career flying with NVGs?
I didn't fly with them. I've had training with them, but I've never operationally worked with NVGs.
Okay. All right.
Not operationally. Yeah.
So the EMS stuff, we share a hangar with EMS. They're in a 407. And I was talking to the pilot, and he's talking about, depending on the weight of the patient, sometimes with fuel and the people, like you were talking about weight, that's all they have. And he's been in situations where he's like, he picks up and he's like, well, we're going to have to hover here for a second to burn off some fuel and just let it climb out of wherever they're. I mean, have you seen that where you're weight limited?
Yeah. So
once you picked them up.
Yeah. Not flying medical helicopters. I've not, because I was always flying twins. So I was always flying a little bit larger aircraft. In fact, I will say I had the opposite experience. So for me, I could almost, so when we sat on the ramp or at the base waiting for a patient, we were configured to take a 600-pound patient. I knew I could take 600 pounds. So I had an hour and 20 minutes in the bag plus reserve, hour and 20 minutes in the bag plus a 20-minute reserve, me, a medic, a nurse, and I could take a 600-pound patient. And there are two reasons that's important to know. One is for weight and balance, right? Because you can't land on a road and say, well, that patient weighs 135 pounds or that one weighs 150 and then do your weight and balance. No. Right. You do it. You know what it's like with nobody on board. You know what it's like with 600 pounds on board. And as long as that line doesn't leave the envelope, you're good. That's one reason. And the other is, just for performance. So I knew that I could take a boatload of weight. And so the benefit that gave us, and we did this often, was that we could take family members. So, and you say, I don't know how it works today, but here's how I handled it. If you guys, let's just say you're the crew, we're the crew tonight flying, and I'm the pilot and you're the nurse and the medic, I would just simply tell you during the brief, I've got enough weight to take 600 pounds. So if that's a child and the mom or the dad, or, whatever, however you want to dice it up, I will accommodate it. And the decision will be yours, whether we take the mother, father, or other person. And the reason I say that is, if you're landing at a scene, we don't shut down. Right. And you really have to depend upon the people that you work with to make the decision whether the parent, typically a parent, is mentally stable enough to fly with you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I think if you have children, or even if you don't have children, if you have nieces or nephews or whatever, brothers and sisters, you can understand if you have a 10-year-old child that's critically injured and we're taking them to a hospital that's probably an hour and a half away by car, 20, 30 minutes by helicopter. And I don't want to be Debbie Downer here, but sometimes those people, that may be the last time they see their child.
Yeah.
And so I would just simply tell the crew, if you want them to go, if you believe they could go safely, then let's put them in the front seat with me and we'll take them. However, if you don't want them to go for whatever reason, you don't think they're stable enough, whatever the problem may be, then just tell them, I said, no, I can't take the weight. I mean, It was easy to lay the blame off on me.
So Bruce, you would fly the EMS helicopter single pilot?
Yes. Everything we did, single pilot, VFR and IFR.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've only flown IFR in a helicopter with 2 pilots. Well, I did a little bit EMS, but very little. The only time I've really flown IFR 2 pilots with a first officer is on a ship that requires 2 pilots. And quite honestly, I go back to that fuel. Right. I'd rather have 200 pounds of fuel than a 200-pound co-pilot.
Mover feels like that about, multi-crew fighter jets.
I'd rather have the extra gas. See, I was born to fly fighters and helicopters. It's a common thing. It's perfect. Oh, yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome.
So it was it was very interesting, very rewarding.
Yeah. Was it mostly night? I mean, or did you do kind of all flavors?
It's interesting you asked that. So at my last base, it was the busiest base in the country at the time. And but we had trouble staffing it. I remember this was in the early to mid 90s and we just couldn't get pilots. And so we had pretty high standards for pilots who could fly, and those increased at night. So as a result, quite honestly, probably my last year and a half there, I flew only nights. Because I couldn't have another. If you hired a pilot, they had to have so many hours during the day before they could fly nights. Well, that became a logistical nightmare. So I could solve half of that by just flying only nights myself. So for quite a while, I just flew nights. And then I had another, shift partner that could be the new person that was flying days. So I would always have contact with that person. But I really like nights because I think I like the challenge and the air's smoother.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And people are more relaxed. So if you call up Traycon, you call up to get a clearance or everyone's just more chill.
It's because they're sleeping, Bruce, when you call them.
Come up, whatever you want. Just get out of my airspace.
That's okay. That's okay. I don't mind that at all. But awesome. I did a lot of nighttime in that business. And again, it depends upon the location, how much day or night you're going to do. A lot of people do a lot of interfacility transfer. So they're going from one hospital to the next. We did about 28% scene, which is very high. And, they're mostly motor vehicle accidents. And anyway, some of those are pretty sad, but I think you have to realize you're giving the person the best chance possible of survival. So sometimes, the crew will say, hey, Bruce, you can slow back down.
Yep.
Oh, geez. So you're talking about, IFR, IMC in that helicopter. How does that work? I mean, so the scene, you got to have somebody that's reporting VFR somewhere around it, or are you just kind of getting there and figuring it out?
So that's one of the problems. So now remember, I was doing this literally 30 years ago or 27 years ago. So probably some things have changed, but I was really flying at the onset of IFR helicopters for EMS. So here's the big problem is that even hospitals that have approaches, let's say they have a PINS approach, point in space. So we can take off from our base and fly IFR to that hospital. But once we arrive, we got to have gas. How do I get gas? I don't have enough even to file and fly to the airport and have a legal alternate. In other words, so if the weather's so bad, I got to go IFR. It's also so bad that I need an alternate, and the alternate is I can't get out of the weather system. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's a fuel that you're basically in a corner the whole time.
So how do you think I get gas? I scud run over and get gas. We'd fly IFR to the hospital, drop off the crew, then fly VFR. And I say scud run, but VFR. But obviously the weather isn't what we'd like, or we wouldn't have been flying IFR in the first place. So you'd have to go get fuel. Then you could go IFR back with the patient and the crew.
Yeah.
So if I were, if I had a magic wand and could change the world, I would insist that every hospital that has a approach, and this is Bruce Webb's personal opinion, before everyone goes, batshit crazy on this, every hospital should have fuel.
Yeah.
How many times have you landed your fighter jet somewhere and said, okay, I'm going to take back off and I don't get any gas?
Never.
Yeah.
There
Never.
you go.
Never.
So because I'm a fixed wing idiot, but what kind of legs does a typical EMS helicopter have? I mean,
I would say it depends again on what you're willing to carry, what you want your load to be. But I would say for us, when I was flying EMS in different parts of the country, whether it be Nebraska, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, most of our legs were between 20 and 30 minutes each leg. And so we'd go from the remote base, 20 or 30 minutes to get the patient, and then 20 to 30 minutes to the receiving hospital.
mm-hmm.
And that would be in a municipal area, right? A terminal area. We'd get gas, we'd go get the crew, and we'd go home.
So if you had you're talking about your 600-pound reserve, you're saying you had about an hour and change of hour and a half of fuel?
Yep, hour and 20 plus 20 reserve, 30 if I was IFR.
Is that because I'm ignorant of helicopter. Is that typical for helicopters? I mean, mover, is that how it is for the sheriff's helicopter? Like what kind of endurance?
We got long range tanks on ours. So we're over 2 hours. Actually, we can almost go to 3.5 because the thing's got the long range.
But normal helicopters are right around
2 hours. Everything's 2 hours. 2 hours is
2
about like the 407 that's in the hangar with us. They're 2 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we weren't full of fuel. So yeah, mover's exactly right. If you take the average typical civilian helicopter without aux tanks, you're going to have an endurance of 2 hours. If you're flying like a Hughes 500, a 500 or a 520, they hold 64 gallons. That's what that airframe holds. The belly is what the belly is.
Right.
And so you're going to have 2 hours. When you get into a EC 135, 145, 155, you're going to go out to 2.5, maybe 3 hours on standard fuel. We took a 215, which would be a Super Puma. We flew a 215 from Fort Worth all the way down to Buenos Aires, Argentina, and all the way back. So one crew flew it down, and then I flew it back as a part of a crew, myself, and in this case, it was Dale Livingston. My boss was with me. So, but we had ferry tanks on board. So that ship, as I recall, held about 700 gallons. Wow. And then we were carrying about, I think it was 400 in the oblivet in the back, 400 additional gallons. Now with that, we could stay airborne about 5 hours. I
don't have the bladder for that.
No
way. There's just no way.
No. Okay. And that doesn't get better with age either.
We'd have to land somewhere. A couple quick questions from the audience before we move on from the EMS stuff. Corvette World Rob says, stay safe for those in the path of the storm, which we're going to talk about some hurricane stuff here in a second. Michael says, Skyle said 6 passengers got rescued off the ferry, hopped in a cab back to LaGuardia, took the next flight to Charlotte, no luggage. That's crazy. Renee says, no co-driver in NASCAR either. Why would you? And then she asked, Bruce, did you fly a NICU with the incubator?
Oh, yeah. We flew a lot of isolettes. We call them isolettes. I don't know if that's different than an incubator, but we called them isolettes. Very heavy. They weighed like 200 pounds. Wow. And typically when we flew an isolette, we took another crew member too. So we would take a nurse and a medic that always flew with us. And then we would take a NICU nurse or a specialist that could manage the isolette. And, the technology is just amazing what can be on board those aircraft. And today, they're like, we never carried blood products, but now everyone carries blood products. They've got whole blood on board these aircraft now.
Wow.
But talking about the luggage, I believe it's true, as told to me by somebody, I think it was Sullenberger, that every person who left their baggage in the overhead got it back.
Oh,
every
wow.
person
Don't
that
spread
took
that rumor, because no one's going to check bags. It's going to take twice as long. There's no overhead space.
Yeah, but even in the ship, obviously you got it back. People who took it onto the wing.
Oh,
nope.
So there you go. So that is a good
you get out on that wing, you think you're gonna, you're carrying your briefcase, your baloney, So that's still at the bottom of the Hudson somewhere.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wicked Spider Black just says, hi guys, to a Monday night show. And Saints are playing the Chiefs right now, getting probably slaughtered. Right? Missing Monday Night Football. Bob says 3G's top of TCU about an hour and a half. Yeah, that's what my instructor used to say. He used to have this this mantra about that. But wow. So from EMS, what was next?
So actually from there, I came to Airbus, or at the time it was called Eurocopter. And
okay.
So
all the EC is just the pre-Airbus, right?
Well, here's how that all works. So the nomenclature is unique, interesting. So before 92, there was no Eurocopter. So before 92, it was Aerospatiale. So the Dolphins, like the Coast Guard Dolphins, Alouettes, Llamas, Gazelles, those were Pumas, Super Pumas. That was all Aerospatiale. And then the BO-105s, we call them BOCALs or BO-105s, and BK-117s, that was MBB. Messerschmitt, Bocal, and Blohm.
Oh.
And in America, they were located in Philly. And so in 92, though, it was called a merger because that's politically correct. But really what happened was Aerospatiale bought MBB. And that formed Eurocopter. And then we were Eurocopter from then until 2014, when we became Airbus Helicopters. And then in 2016, the word helicopters was dropped, and we are all now just Airbus. If you look at someone's card, my card doesn't say Airbus Helicopters. It says Airbus. And then down off to the side, it says helicopters, because we're Airbus, the helicopter division, or Airbus Space and Defense, or Airbus Commercial, which is the fixed wing. But we're all Airbus. We're all Airbus.
Was Eurocopter French? Like, was their base? So did you learn French when you got hired?
No, I don't speak any French. I'm ashamed to say that I've been over there 24 times and I can barely order a beer in French or a glass of wine.
They all speak English, right?
Most do. And you know what? So that's another interesting thing. I think that, as an observer of human nature or behavior, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of cool things, right? I've been all over France, all over many places. The French kind of get a bad reputation. People will say they're kind of rude or they're hoity-toity and they won't talk to Americans. I think you have to understand how important language is to them. So language to a French person is kind of sacrosanct. They don't use slurs and a lot of, street slang. They don't. In fact, Sarkozy, that was one of the criticisms the French public had with Sarkozy, because he did use kind of street language. So my point is, the French really value speaking properly. So think about, if you ask them a question and they can understand it typically, because a lot of people can't understand a language but can't speak it. I think that's pretty common. So they understand what you're asking, but quite honestly, they're trying to not embarrass themselves or be rude to you by responding and butchering the language. I really think that's a lot of it. But
so it comes off standoffish.
It comes to standoffish, but it's really not. They're trying to be polite, but it just doesn't come off that way. And there'll be people that will disagree with me. But again, I've been going over there for 26 years, and that's my observation.
I've been to France a half a dozen times, and I don't have anything other than some crazy graffiti. I don't have anything bad to say about France or the French.
They know how to live life. Again, people will criticize them, because they take off, like, I forget if it's 3, 4, 5 weeks, and like in August, they all take off. They're all on vacation. And, people will really be critical of that. But the reality is, they're living a fantastic life. They're not allowing work to interfere with their lives.
Mhm.
So, you know, I think that's so contrary to what we do as Americans, right? We live to work. Even when you don't have to work, you go to work.
Oh, Bruce, if you could have heard Mover yelling at me earlier today, it's like, Gonky, you go on a 3-week camping trip. No work gets done.
He's on
literally
a very long hiatus here, Bruce. But it's all been in America, right? You've been based in the U.S. for most of the time with Airbus, or with
I've been based. Yes, I've been based here, but I've had the opportunity to fly through most of South America. You know, England, Ireland, France, Germany, Indonesia, Malaysia, Borneo, Singapore. Yeah, I've had an opportunity to go a lot of places and to do a lot of things in a helicopter. I think, I came out of Singapore one time going down to Jakarta, Indonesia, IFR in a helicopter, and I ended up having to let down over the ocean near the island of Sumatra. Sumatra sits just to the the west of that flight path, and I had to get fuel in a place called Palembang, which is in the middle of nowhere on Sumatra. That island's famous for the orangutans. That's why Sumatra is kind of a famous place. Anyway, but flying in America is, relatively speaking, much easier than flying in some of these other places.
Oh, that's true. No, that's very true. But as far as your career, though, how did you work your way up to becoming the chief pilot? Like, what'd you start out doing, and kind of how that progression work?
Right. So again, I think so much of our lives, if we're really able to admit it, are kind of luck or happenstance, or maybe it's preparedness leads to luck. I don't know. But so I was hired at Airbus as a pilot. I came to Airbus. I got there on the 4th of February in 99 and was hired really kind of because of my BK skills, my BK experience. And so that was, again, February of 99. And I was promoted to chief pilot in July of 2000. So I'd only worked there 16 months.
Wow.
I was 30. I think I was 35. Maybe I just turned 36 at the time.
Wow.
And
that's awesome.
And that was really a combination of circumstance. The gentleman who was chief pilot was stepping down, and there were other people within the organization that really either some didn't want to be the chief pilot, some weren't capable of being the chief pilot. So the offer was made to me. And so I took the position, and I was the chief pilot for 16 years.
Wow.
And
Bruce, did you know somebody? Did you know somebody at Airbus before? No.
No, didn't know a soul.
Gonky's like, were you connected? How do you know this?
No, I just.
Good job, Gonky. Way to insult our guest.
No, I just asked because it's kind of you've done crop dusting, EMS, and then, it's kind of a departure from, in my mind, of the kind of flying that you had been doing.
Yeah, but I think I've always been a person who, I don't know, I'm not afraid to take a chance, and I'm not afraid to do something that's outside even my skill set, to be honest with you. So Airbus had this position at the time as Eurocopter. And so I remember I flew down so a couple things. I know no one today does this, but when I sent my resume to the chief pilot at Airbus, Eurocopter at the time, I sent it FedEx P1. So it arrived on his desk in a FedEx overnight envelope. I think that's probably 50% of the way I got the job. No one sends resumes that way. So immediately I stood out from the crowd.
Yeah.
And then I spoke to him, and he said, when can you come down to interview? So I went down to interview, and this was all happening over Christmas time. So they had, I forget the exact timeline, but basically they had tentatively offered me the job. They wanted me to come down and, so my wife and I went down to look for houses, blah, 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 blah.
Is this Dallas?
Yes. Okay. And so we came down, and I still had not had the actual written offer, but we came down, we bought a house.
Wow.
Oh,
And so,
Nice.
so when we moved, and the guy who hired me didn't know. When we moved, he said, "Where are you living?" I said, "Well, we bought a house down here." And he's like, "How in the hell do you buy a house?" I said, "We bought it when we came down to look." He's like, "Wow, you were pretty confident you were going to get the job, huh?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I guess if I didn't, I would hunt." You
Wow.
know, not you. You two, I absolutely would bet my life have made the same gamble in your lives.
Gonky.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
So I'm not afraid, and I would encourage anyone who's listening,
Yeah.
don't fear. That doesn't mean you stick your arm into a fire pit, but it does mean if you have a reasonable expectation and you believe in yourself and you believe that you have this potential, don't fear taking a chance. And I think in my life that's been, it's served me well. So and when I came down for Airbus, actually, honestly, when you asked how I ended up being chief pilot, now that I'm thinking more about that, at some point, I was always interested in the law. I'd taken several law classes at university, and it just intrigued me. And so before I was asked if I would consider being chief pilot, I had made a proposal. Again, I'd only been at Airbus, 16 months, but I made a proposal to my boss who hadn't yet resigned. I said, "Hey, how about you send me to law school, Airbus, send me to law school. I'll go to law school. And when I get out of law school, I'll work for you guys as a expert in helicopters. It's also now an attorney." And he came back about 2 weeks later and says, "I got a counter offer for you. How about you become chief pilot and we'll send you to test pilot school in Mojave."
Oh, that's awesome.
So that's what I did. But ultimately, I never did go to the full test pilot school, but that's because of me, not because of Airbus. So when it came time, I went to the short course. They have a short course and the long course. I went to the short course, and then they've got a much longer course. But at the time, I really wanted a training helicopter. We didn't have any training helicopters. So everyone we taught, we would take a new helicopter off the assembly line. And then after we did flight test on it, we'd use it for about 2 weeks doing flight training. Then we'd deliver it and take the next one off. So we were always using brand new aircraft, but never completed, never configured. So anyway, at the time, the president was Rudy Palladina. I went to Rudy and said, "Hey, Rudy, how about instead of spending the $250,000 on me to go to school, which I don't really care that I go to, how about we buy a helicopter?" So that got us the down payment to go buy a used B2, a 350 B2. 2670 was a serial number.
Wow.
And we bought it out from Florida Power and Light in Florida. I went down and picked it up, brought it back, and that was the first training helicopter at Airbus in America.
Wow.
You eventually taught Tom Cruise.
Yeah, well, so I did his first. So yeah, that's a kind of a long story, but
go on.
When he was going to shoot Mission Impossible, I was a chief pilot, and the president said, "Hey, we're considering kind of getting into an agreement with Tom on he wants to fly the helicopter. He'd like for us to teach him, blah 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 blah." And so honestly, and I don't think Tom really knew this, although he wouldn't be surprised, the first time I met him and the first day or two was really to assess whether we wanted to get, into bed with him in this project, because, we don't want to throw money down the drain, and we certainly don't want to get into a position that's bad for Airbus. So honestly, it was twofold initially. One was to assess him as what his skill set was. Could he become a safe, successful helicopter pilot? And could we work with him? And, just kind of what the overall disposition was. So I probably did his first 6 training flights, spent like 2 nights in a hotel, kind of, you may remember, do you remember Chris Kyle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Chris Kyle. And, he was unfortunately murdered, right?
Sniper,
in Texas.
American sniper. Yeah.
Yeah. So where he was murdered, where he suffered his demise, is a place called Rough Creek Lodge. And Rough Creek is a place, it's a beautiful place. And it's about 45 minutes southwest of here by helicopter, probably a 2-hour car drive. Anyway, we would go down there a lot, and we still do go down there. It's a beautiful kind of rural resort. So like the second day or so that I was flying with Tom, we went down there and spent the night. And I will tell you, an incredibly competent aviator. It's interesting. I didn't really have any expectation either way. I mean, I knew who he was, but I will tell you, after spending, let's just say 10 days with him initially, and then being around him, because I just couldn't do it. Of course, he wanted me to train him. He wanted me to finish his training, of course, not because I'm all that in a bag of chips, but because I'm the first person he knew. And when you learn to meet somebody, you think, okay, so he wanted me to do it. But again, I was chief pilot. We had another 20 some pilots. I cannot be spending day and night working with him. And so Tim Maddox is actually the person who finished his training. Fantastic pilot, Tim McAdams. And so I told Tom, I said, hey, listen, Tim's going to be your instructor, but I promise you, if you have any issues, come to me and we'll resolve them. So I'm just asking you to give him the same chance you gave me when you first met me. And of course, he was fine because Tim's a fantastic guy. And I'll tell you a little story about Tom that really, I think, tells me all you need to know about him is he is super fit. So like when we would go run in the morning, like when we were away from the facility, we'd run every morning. I mean, and he really took his health and his fitness seriously. Mentally, physically, he really takes that all very seriously. So fast forward maybe 3 weeks and he's at Airbus and he's receiving his flight training, but I had a rule, I think it still exists. You can't work more than 6 days straight. I don't care what day you take off, but you're taking a day off. So for the first couple of weeks, Tom was fine with that. But, he's a busy person and time is money. And so like on a Friday afternoon, Tim McAdams said, hey, Tom, I'd like to speak to you. So I said, sure. So I went down to the classroom and he commenced to ask me very politely, very respectfully, very thoughtfully. He wanted to be able to fly 7 days straight. He wanted to not have to take a day off. He wanted to finish his training with no breaks. And I explained that while I appreciated the fact he's in fantastic physical health, he's in fantastic mental health. I tell you what, he studied as hard as any person you'll ever meet. And so he was doing all the right things. And I said, I admire everything you're doing, but still at the end of the day, you're a human. And I don't care what you do on your day off. I don't care. But what you may not do is fly a helicopter here. And here's what he did. He said, okay, I disagree with you, but I respect your decision. And that was the end of it. I can tell you, there are not many men in this world that have the power that he has that wouldn't have said, I disagree with you and I'm going to go over your head. Wow. And he probably could have.
Yeah.
But he didn't.
Yeah.
He said, I disagree, but I accept your decision. And that, honestly, I was so impressed with him and still am. I've gotten a few Christmas gifts from him, actually.
Really? You still keep in touch with him?
He sends like a Christmas cake every year. I don't know if we got one last year or not. We've moved since, but and his sister, I won't say her last name because maybe it's not well known. Her first name is Cass, Cass. Fantastic woman. She's a playwright. So I've communicated with her a lot, and I will tell you, he is just a stand-up person.
That's
I was
awesome.
That's good to hear.
super impressed.
Yeah, that's
Super
awesome to hear.
impressed.
Did he have it? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the last kind of funny thing was we were landing. Took off out of Grand Prairie. We were flying a C2, a BK-117 C2, maybe a D2. I forget, a BK. And we were going into Arlington Airport. And this is how the community, you just can't hardly keep a secret. So I'm doing all the radio calls. He's already a helicopter, or he's already an airplane pilot. He didn't need to learn to do the radios. I know the community. I know the area. So I'm just doing all the radio work. So I call Arlington Tower and I said, hey, Tower, my call sign's Euro 9. It's not nearly as impressive as yours. It's just Euro, like Eurocopter.
That's
9.
cool. Yeah,
so I'm Euro 9. I said, hey, Tower, Euro 9, you know, off of Grand Prairie inbound landing with Kilo or whatever it was. And the tower controller, and this is an FAA tower, said, negative, Ghost Rider. The pattern is full.
That's true. That is awesome.
Cool.
That is true.
I'm still waiting for that one.
Dude, tower guys, they're smart. They know. They just know. They already. I can't tell. Big voice Shrekky. They're very good at that. But what I was going to ask, and you kind of just alluded to it, he was not a helicopter pilot.
No.
Prior to this, right? So you were assessing, you know, if he could hit the hover button and actually fly the helicopter. So he took to that just instantly and went from that to doing the stunts in that movie.
Yep. So when a lot of that was filmed in New Zealand, and so Tim McAdams, the pilot that finished him up, we actually sent him to go kind of be a I don't know, just a helper, just to kind of, you know, he would say, okay, I want to do a maneuver that looks like this. And then him and Tim would go up and practice it, you know, to make sure that he could do it. And I mean, so again, I give Tom a lot of credit. He treats his craft seriously.
Yeah.
You know, I think lesser men would have just said, well, I'm trained now. I know what I'm doing. I can just do it. But he really, I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. I really
He's been
do.
in the news on civilian stuff, like landing his helicopter. What in the UK did he landed in somebody's backyard? And he's done a lot of
stuff.
Rides.
Yeah, he took him for a ride.
and it was in a Airbus helicopter. So it's worked out great for. Is that an Airbus or was it a Eurocopter? Was it
No, it's an Airbus. Okay. Yeah. Well, so again, our nomenclature, I think I got way off on a tangent, but it used to be, so AS stands for aerospatial.
Okay.
So when you see an AS moniker, that was designed during the aerospatial time. If you see a very old helicopter, like a Puma, a 330, they are SA. They're SA, not AS. That stands for Sud aviation, which means south in French. Sud is south, nord is north.
Yeah.
The Gazelle, the Llama, the Alouette.
Thunder.
SA, yes, Gazelle. Yep, with an Astazu engine. Yeah. So those are SA for Sud aviation. Then it became Aerospatial, and then it was AS. Then when we became Eurocopter, it was EC for Eurocopter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, up until then, the numbers didn't mean anything. But when we became Eurocopter, the numerals then had meaning. So let's just take a 130, for example, an EC 130, EC Eurocopter. The first digit tells you if it's civil or military. A 1 is civil, 5's military.
Oh, okay.
The next digit tells you how many metric ton it is at gross mass. So a 130 is a civil, 3 metric ton, 2,205 times 3, civil, 3 metric ton, single, EC 130. Zeros meant single, 5's meant twin. So 135, civil, 3 metric ton twin. 145, civil, 4 metric ton twin. 155, Now the glitch in it is the 225, the EC 225. It's 12 metric ton, 24,800 pounds. So we just carried the 1. So instead of it being, so we carried the 1. Yeah.
So in your career with Airbus, have you flown every helicopter like in the arsenal? Like, have you had the opportunity to fly all of these?
Yeah. So I hate to even, So I've had the fortune to be, as an instructor, in BO-105s, BK-117s, every model of 117 up to the D2, the Dolphins, the 350s. So let me just do it a different way. The only ship I've not really been qualified as an instructor in for Airbus is the 160, the 175, and the The NH-90 I was trained up in, but I never completed because we shut the program down. The NH-90 is NATO helicopter for the 90s. It's a little smaller. It's about 20,000 pounds. So I started the training for that. Pretty unique because like in Europe, most of the French fly the French side of the house and most of the Germans fly the German side, but very few people fly them all.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just was at the right place at the right time.
Whereas again, because I'm an ignorant fixed wing type, but when you're going from like as a chief pilot flying these different helicopters and you're saying you get an instructor position in them, is it like, how long does it take to get checked out? And like if I was to switch to like a 7.3 or whatever, there's a type rating and all this ground school. Is it? I mean, are there helicopter sims?
Sure.
Know what I'm saying?
So like a 225, that's probably about $250,000 type rating. So the ground school's 3 weeks.
Okay.
And then, yeah, it's probably a little more than that actually, start to finish.
Wow.
Yeah. So, now that would be the most expensive. It's the largest, but yeah, we have simulators for 350s. So for what we call an H125, we have simulators for that. That's a 5,225 pound aircraft.
Do you get your
all
type
the way up
in
to
that?
25,000? No, so you don't. So this is really going to surprise you. I don't know if Movers shared all this with you yet, but
He didn't.
so in helicopter, he did. So let's just imagine, and I'm assuming, do you know what a Robinson R-22 is, Gonky? So I think, again, I haven't flown one in 30 years or more, but they used to be gross weight of 1,370 pounds was max gross mass on a R-22. They used to have an 0320 in them. I think they have 0360s now. Anyway, that aircraft, piston engine helicopter, is great little helicopter, but as basic as you can get. Okay. So let's imagine we teach you, Mover, someone teaches you, and that's a bad term. I'll come back to that in a moment, but you learn to fly an R-22.
Okay.
Once you learn to fly that, you are now legal and licensed to fly anything up to a ship that weighs 12,500 pounds or less, regardless of engines, regardless of complexity. There's no turbine transition. There's no technically advanced aircraft transition. There's no multi-engine. There's no such thing as a multi-engine helicopter rating.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as floats, seaplane, nothing.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Nothing. So now, whether that's right or wrong, but I do want to come back and clarify something, because I think it is important for people who, I tell people, no one has taught anyone to fly a helicopter. No one. What happens is the instructor rides along while you learn. And there's a big difference. Yeah. No one taught you to ride a bicycle. You got on the thing and you fell off a lot and you learned. And that's how flying a helicopter is, probably how learning to fly anything is. But really, the instructor's there to keep you within a bound so you don't hurt yourself, you don't hurt the aircraft while you learn.
Yeah.
And
that's a good way to put it, because
it's good
you gotta find the hover button. And it's something you can't explain it, you can't describe it. Eventually you just get it. And then you'll have it for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And isn't it so funny, Mover? So here's my experience, and you tell me if this was yours. So I remember like learning to fly, and I remember struggling and I take the lesson. I'm like, okay, well, today is going to be the day I can just do this. And I don't remember how many hours it was. Let's just say 10 hours. I don't remember. But at the 10-hour mark, I could do it. I could just do it. Yeah. I couldn't understand how come I couldn't do it yesterday. Right? I'm like kicking myself. I'm like,
yeah.
Why didn't I do this yesterday and save myself that money?
Yeah. It's a button. It's a button. It reminded me, because I was a fighter guy prior of flying formation, like very tight formation, just the fine motor skills and the constant corrections. And that made it an easier, I think, transition for me to kind of flip that switch. But you're right. It's definitely, so that brings up something you touched on earlier that I think is related. I'm kind of curious your opinion. Helicopter jobs are very hard to come by, especially when you look at EMS and you look at that. You were talking about how you couldn't get a replacement and stuff like that. But if you go look at what they require, it is way more than fixed wing. So for, I don't know if it's insurance purposes or what, but like if you look at, you got to have so much turbine time, you got to have so much NVG time now, you got to have so much of this stuff. It's nothing like, it's so much harder. And then they don't pay as much. What do you think about how the job market is for stuff like that?
Yeah, it is fascinating, isn't it? So I'm saying this a little tongue in cheek, but you can almost determine the qualifications of the chief pilot for the organization based upon what they require.
Yeah, true.
Right? If they want 3,000 hours, that means the chief pilot has 4.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I'm being a little silly, but
yeah, valid.
So, but here's what's wrong with all of that, I think, unfortunately, and I don't have a better way. So it's bad to criticize something you don't have a better way, but hours are a poor measure of competency. They may be the only measure we have, but they're a poor measure. And people will often ask me, and I bet you've been asked this 1,000 times, how many hours do you have? I don't answer anymore. Here's what I ask. How many hours would I need to tell you that I have for you to believe that I am competent? I've never had anyone say a number that was above how many hours I have. So I'd say I've got that.
Yeah.
Because it really is, think about it. I believe this. I'm sure, never flown with either of you, don't know. I know you a little bit, Mover, but Gonky, the first time I met you, I am sure you're exceptionally good pilots. I believe that. I believe you're exceptionally good when you had 50 hours as well. I'm not saying you're the same skill set you are now, but I'll bet you if we could look at every person you were in a class with and you said, excellent, 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 average, below average. If they stayed in their career today, we would say the same things about them.
Yeah.
Very few people that I know went from below average or average to excellent. It's just like that hover button. There is something, it's fine to say that anyone can be a pilot. And I think that is largely true, but not everyone could be a great pilot.
Yeah.
Just like not everyone can be a great surgeon or a great attorney or a great anything, a great farmer. Yeah, there's something to that.
Well, yeah. Bruce, so this is great because listening to you, what I hear from you is you're an educator. And
I love that.
That's the transition you made in your career. How hard was it to step back from the chief pilot position? And was it a new position was it like, hey, was it another thing where you made a proposal and like, that's great, you're it? Or how did that work out? And tell me about your passion of teaching and then the safety aspect as well.
It's interesting. So, first of all, I'm going to say that it's uncomfortable to talk about yourself, right? A little bit. It is kind of.
We're fighter pilots.
Bruce, we're fighter pilots.
Okay.
It's hard for us not to talk about ourselves during all this, but go on.
Well, it does feel a little bit, I don't know. So let me say this. I'll try to be as just factual. So I believed that when I was at my 15-year mark as chief pilot, I believe that for the growth of Airbus, for the growth of Bruce, and for the good of everyone, I needed to move. I needed to be out of that position. I mean, and so at the time, I won't use the gentleman's name, but he was the chief financial officer, soon to be the president of our company. Ramon's his first name, great guy. So I went to Ramon. I said, hey, I think I need to change. And so he said, well, let's go have lunch. Let's go talk about that. So we went to lunch. And he's a French gentleman. I've known him for a long, long time. And he said, are you sure you want to do this? You sure you want to step down from being chief pilot and do something else? And I had already pitched what I wanted. So what I have, director of aviation education, is a position that I invented, and I wrote the. So again, awesome. I give Airbus a whole lot of credit. I'll come back to that, but Airbus has been good to me, and I think really does have aviation safety at the core. We're putting our money where our mouth is. So I said, Rama, I think it's time for me to do something else. And he said, well, you do know, I mean, as chief pilot, your position's pretty well assured, right? I mean, he said, but if you start this new endeavor, and things don't go well, or maybe it just doesn't work, we may not, I mean, we're not going to keep you just to keep you. And I remember, and he would remember this, and Ramah, if you're listening,
if he's listening, we've gone big time.
Correct.
We're here.
Correct.
You'll be surprised who may listen. So Ramah said, he said, well, if you're sure, I said, I am sure, Ramah. I said, I've never been afraid to do what I think I should do. And I believe this is something that Airbus needs and I need. And I said, I believe that within 12 months of me starting this position, I'll be more valuable to you as this educator than I am as chief pilot. And you won't be able to let me go. And he kind of smiled and said, I'm sure he thought, yeah, that's pretty cocky. But I think if you know, that was July of 2016, almost exactly 16 years to the day of when I started as chief pilot. And so I have been in this position for over 8 years, which is half as long as I was chief pilot.
That's awesome.
And Airbus, I mean, it's not an inexpensive endeavor. I mean, you know, at first it was just me, right? It was just me. And I would travel the country mostly, but the world, but mostly the country, probably 85% in the US and 15% overseas, doing presentations. I have about a dozen that I do routinely. And, you know, that's not inexpensive. And so I did that. And then, of course, COVID hit. And I was always an advocate that in person is the best way to do anything is in person. I think the efficacy of that, you just can't get, even doing this.
Yeah.
Being in person, looking that person dead in the eye, you know, the little intonations that, so when COVID hit, I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't travel now. So I did something I didn't think that would be effective. And I said, okay, I'm going to make videos. I mean, if you go back to the website and look at the videos, those first probably 8 or 10 were done by Bruce Webb with an iPhone 10 and 11 as a camera. I had a 10 and 11, and then my microphone was an iPhone 5, because if you know, well, you cannot record to an iPhone. You can't record other than through the microphone on an iPhone. At least you couldn't on a 10 or 11. So I had to have an iPhone 5 with my earpiece and then record on 2 cameras. And I had to learn to use editing software. I used Final Cut Pro. And I had to make videos. And so, you know, I started doing that. I think my first one was April of 2020. And now this wasn't intentional. It was just kind of an oversight, but I never got permission to do any of it. I just did it. And it was probably about a year later, someone in France, I think, asked someone in America, hey, who's this Bruce Webb and what is he doing?
Been there.
Yeah, so, this doesn't work out well, remember.
Doesn't always work out, but go on.
Yeah. So our attorney, who I have a huge amount of respect for, Kevin, called me and we chatted, and he said, hey, you gotten, you know, where did the clearance come to do this? I said, I don't have any clearance. And I really hadn't given it much thought, quite honestly. And he said, well, we're okay, great. Don't stop, but we're going to have to look into it. And I said, well, just so you know, if there's any problem, it's 100% on me. I mean, I take full responsibility. I didn't, you know, I did this all, and I take responsibility. So anyway, ultimately they decided it was okay. I could continue to do what I do. And I have a letter in my file somewhere that says I can do this, because you cannot have everybody to Airbus. If you look at my videos, every one of them has a bumper at the end that says Airbus. The podcast has a disclaimer at the end about Airbus, and Airbus links to my website. So Airbus, like SAFOs and things, they link to the website. So we're very closely entwined. But yeah, I do have clearance to do it, permission to do it. Just like my appearance here, I run it through our attorneys. I mean, I'm very open. I'm not hiding anything. You know, I try to do the right thing. Sometimes I mess up, right? We all mess up. And I hope that the good that I do gives me a little latitude. So when I mess up, people know I'm not being intentional in my gaffe or my faux pas. And, but I will say, this is, I guess, a little bit of a cheer for Airbus, but it's impressive to me that Airbus still funds what I do. I was just in South Africa 2 weeks ago. I went to South Africa. I spoke in Pretoria. I'm going to Vancouver in like 2 weeks, and I'm coming back. I immediately go to Brazil to speak. I come back. I immediately go to DC. And this is all funded 100% by Airbus to promote aviation safety. And I've never once asked to speak anywhere, never once. But I've spoken for Air Force One and Air Force Two. I was invited to speak to Air Force One and Two, the entire cruise. Is it I forget. I remember the commanding general. Her name was Joanna something, a 3-star general. Joanna, I should know her name. I met her. I was at a girls in aviation thing, and I bumped into her.
Cool.
Is it the 89th Airlift Wing or something like that?
That sounds
Out of Andrews.
We don't know anything about heavies.
Yeah. Well, anyway,
Gonky doesn't even know about his own unit. Yeah,
Skid's listening. He'll put it in. He'll put it in the chat.
Yeah.
I'm fact checking, and so far Bruce has not said anything that was incorrect.
Well, I think there you go.
Thank you. I try not to, because, but I think it was like the 89th Airlift. But anyway, I met this lady I was talking, and anyway, I was never in the military. So this lady comes up, she's in a flight suit, but hell, I'm in a flight suit. That doesn't mean anything. You can buy them at Kmart.
Yeah.
So
nice stars.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I don't even look at that. So she came up, and I was talking to her, and she asked if I had a card. I didn't, because I'm at a girls in aviation thing. It was girls. It was like 8-year-olds or 8th grade to high school or something. And I said, I don't. She said, well, if I could get your information, I'd love to talk to you or something. And so I gave her my email. And then before she left, I gave her a big hug. I'm pretty gregarious, so I gave her a hug. And when I turned around, everybody's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't know. I was talking to that woman. And they're like, she is a lieutenant general. And I said, well, good. What's that? Because I didn't know. I do know it's a 3-star, but I didn't know. And so that was a Saturday. I had an email on my computer Monday, and it was from her. And when she said she knew somebody at the 89th Airlift. Anyway, she was the commanding general there, but not at that time. She'd just gone somewhere else. Anyway, so I got an invite to go speak for Air Force One and Air Force Two. And they don't fly Airbus airplanes or helicopters. So anyway, I've spoken to many organizations that do not fly our products. Airbus is not interested in keeping safety relegated to people who fly our products. I don't care if you fly an F-18, a Sikorsky, a Bell, an Instrom, a Robinson. In fact, I've spoken at Bell Helicopter headquarters for Bell Helicopter.
Wow.
I know they're not going to buy our products.
Right.
But Airbus doesn't care. We don't care. And so I am super proud of that. That takes
yeah. Wow. So one of the initiatives and this is how I came to know you, was the 56 seconds to live. And the education you've done in the helicopter community, because inadvertent IMC, or instrument meteorological conditions, is a big problem. In fact, not too long ago, we had this in New Orleans. We had a 407, very similar, hit some wires. It's a
coming down the causeway.
Yeah. It's a very common problem. And you've taken it and you've made some well-produced videos, like professionally done with I'm assuming they're actors, but someone playing the role. Talk about that and kind of how that came about, and kind of, are you still promoting that? And is it still a very big, high emphasis item for you?
Sure. So honestly, that started, that whole thing started with myself and Scott Terrell, who's an FAA gentleman. He's retired now, but we were talking about an endeavor like that. And I said to Scott, listen, I'm a one-man band. I don't have the bandwidth to do that. I mean, yeah, we all know we need to get out in front of this, but I don't have the wherewithal. And so Scott contacted HAI, and it still is Chris. Yep, great guy. Love Chris.
He texted me, by the way, while we were doing this. He said, "Hey, ask him about Tom Cruise."
Chris
so
is
hi, Chris, by the way.
Yeah,
Chris is awesome.
Hi, Chris. He is the best of the best. I have nothing but respect for Chris. And so Chris, really, I will give 90% of the credit to Chris Hill, because he's the one that found the money, and he's the one who hired, at the time it was HAI, Helicopter Association International, now VAI, Vertical Aviation International. So Chris was able to get the money. Chris hired a director. The director hired an actor. They came to our facility. We filmed in our facility. And then some of the other stuff was done at, I believe it's Frasca. Chris can correct me. But yeah, we got together, we wrote script, we storyboarded it. And I think that, we know that you have to have a message, but if you don't have a way to move that message that's compelling and that is palatable by an audience, it falls on deaf ears.
Yeah.
So it does still exist. HAI still hosts that, or Vertical Aviation International. So there's a course. We wrote a course. So Nick Mayhew, myself, Chris Hill again, Scott Boughton, all got together, and we did this over probably 6 or 8 months during COVID, and we'd get together and write. And so we wrote the courseware that goes with the training, which goes with this 56 Seconds to Live. And, it's difficult to know what's effective. I do know that a lot of people have taken the course. We do get a lot of positive comments about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's we have to keep banging that drum. It is, there's such a dichotomy between flying a helicopter, VFR. VFR is not difficult. IFR is not difficult. Inadvertent IFR, IMC, that's the tough one. Because quite honestly, what happens, when you're trying to maintain VFR, you're working real hard to maintain VFR.
Yeah.
And you're kind of maneuvering aggressively. You're doing a lot of things, and your mindset is VFR, VFR, VFR. And now when you finally find yourself IMC, you're not in a good mental state typically, right?
Yeah.
You're not in stable flight. The reason this happens and kills a lot of people is when they enter the clouds, they're already in an unstable attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And, then you start making abrupt, large flight control inputs. And Mover, you can talk to this. I don't know, but, a helicopter, for most of the helicopters, they're all a little different, Gonky. But, if you move the flight control a millimeter, that's a pretty good flight control displacement.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So,
and one of the things I wanted to bring up too is it's not just this is one of the things I've learned. I just started flying law enforcement aviation in OH-58, and one of the things they've talked to me about, and I foresee as the most dangerous thing we do, is we will go out over the woods in pitch black night with no discernible horizon, and you're in this bank looking for somebody on the ground. And the next thing you know, you're spatially disoriented with no horizon. You might as well be inadvertent in the IMC. It's the same thing. Maintain the control, transition to instruments, trust what the instruments say. Maybe get yourself out of that situation. It's all the same principles that don't just necessarily relate to inadvertent and IMC, but it's the same mindset.
Absolutely, and it happens so quickly.
Yeah,
and I tell people, if you've not flown a ship suffering from the leans, then you need to experience that, and that will humble anyone. So for sure, and think about this. We had an accident. It was in a Bell 206. It was in Texas. It was about 2 years ago, and the pilot was an elderly gentleman. Like I say, elderly. I'm 60, so he was like 72, and but he crashed like a mile from the departure point. So the ranch owned a helicopter. They owned this 206, and this 72-year-old gentleman was the pilot. And the bride and the groom, the newly married couple, got in a helicopter, and he was going to fly them, I think, to Houston. I could be wrong. To spend the night before they went on their honeymoon. And so think about the setting. So it's now midnight. You're in Southwest Texas.
Mm-hmm.
How light is it around? How light is it around there?
Yeah.
Dark as dark can be. But how bright is it where you're departing from?
Yeah.
You're getting ready to take off with the bride and groom. And they're wealthy. How many lights, cameras, flash bulbs, and they were using sparklers.
Oh, wow.
So the pilots, you've never taken off in a plane off an aircraft carrier or off of air base with someone shining lights in your eyes and then says, okay, now go fly. So their night adaptation was non-existent. And he took off in this VFR helicopter and crashed about a mile from departure and unfortunately killed them all. That was in Uvalde, Texas.
Wow.
And, when you script that, when you talk about that, I think we all go, well, yeah. But every helicopter pilot, including you, mover, have done the same thing. It may be a different scenario, but you've landed at a motor vehicle accident, or you've landed where there's lots of lights. And in fact, sometimes people shine the lights at you thinking that's going to help you.
Yeah.
Then you take off into that darkness.
Yeah. The abyss.
And it's tough. So I think that, helicopters are very safe aircraft. There's nothing dangerous about a helicopter. Nothing. Back to your original question, Mover, you talked about the standards so think about this. You're going to go land, you're doing a law enforcement mission tonight, and let's just compare the two. So you're flying it was an F-8. What did you fly, Mover, or do you fly the
helicopter? F-16s and F-18s.
Okay, so you're flying an F-18. That's what you're flying tonight. And then, but Mover B is flying a 206. Okay.
Yeah.
So before you fly the F-18, how much information do you have about the environment you're departing from, going to, and will be in the duration of your flight? How much weather information?
Yeah,
there you go.
Brief. Mission
How much
forecast.
do you have? How much do you have when you leave that police department in your 206?
Whatever ForeFlight gives me.
There you go. And quite honestly, in the area you're operating in, the local weather is local. Down in that holla may be different than 2 miles away. So you have very poor weather information. How about when you depart from that airport, and I don't know if you're based in an airport in the helicopter, but when you depart from an aircraft carrier or you depart from an airport, you've got a METAR, right? A TAF, you've got ATIS, you've got all this information. You've got an airport facility directory telling you how long the runway is, blah, 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 blah. When you take off in that helicopter, what do you have?
Yeah, you hope you have. This just happened. Saturday, we landed at a church for a community event, and we're like, okay, what's the nearest airport? Stennis. Well, the flag is blowing the opposite direction from what Stennis is reporting, and I'm like, this is useless. This is useless information. Like the wind is totally different.
And you could depart from your location into what you perceive as the wind, and as soon as you break that tree line, now you're tailwind.
Mm-hmm.
What's the elevation at the airport you're at before you, not the airport, at the location you're at? What was the field elevation within 50 feet? You can't tell me.
It's probably 50. It's the Gulf. I mean, we're
airport.
Well, it's lucky.
But you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or, so when you fly a helicopter, so much of the things that we have as aviators, you have to figure out yourself in a helicopter. You have to feel it, right? If you're shooting an approach into a confined area at night in Butte, Montana, so you're flying, it's dead of night, whether you're aided or unaided, you're going into a confined area, it's 2 a.m., you've got 5 knots of wind off your nose, you come below that tree line at 100 feet, now you start to feel a rumble, you're like, what's this? It feels like, I'm getting into vortex. You better abandon the approach because the wind may be up your tailpipe now. Yeah. It was into your nose above the tree line, but it's in your tailpipe now. And if you force yourself to the ground, If you say, I know the winds are off my nose, I'm going to hang with this. That's right. Mover shaking his head. No,
no,
no, no.
Yeah.
So that will end in a calamity.
Mhm.
And, you know, there's so much you have to know. Again, and take thoughts all with a grain of salt. I don't fly F-18s, but, or what were you flying off of carriers, Gonky? What kind of planes? F-18s as well?
Yeah.
But there's so much information that helicopter pilots, we just don't have access to. And, you know, you're making your own decisions. Who says it's safe to land? When you landed at that place for the PR, who said that was a safe place to land?
The last recce we got, somebody made a phone call and said, yep, this is where you can put it down. And then we did our standard recce pass, you know, the 2 passes to make sure it was safe. But that's all you got. You got your eyeball and way in, way out, wires, winds, all the stuff that you're looking for.
You guys are reinforcing my life choices here that I made in aviation.
Yeah.
No, I think for every helicopter pilot I've ever met, this is what we love about it, though.
Yeah.
Because it's not easy.
Yeah.
Every time you're flying, you better be thinking. And, you know, I'm maybe contrary to what a lot of people, I'm a very happy-go-lucky person. I really am. But let me tell you, when I'm flying a ship, it's serious. Helicopters, you know, you better treat it with the respect it deserves. Probably no different than if you're flying a jet in combat, you're paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
It'll kill you.
It'll kill you.
Yeah.
And
well, Bruce, that's a good segue because we're going to talk topics, but I think this is kind of a general topic. I wanted to get your opinion on hurricane relief, and I know you talked about in the pre-show about Hurricane Katrina. Obviously, Florida's about to probably experience something pretty catastrophic, and people were a whole helicopter army, right? Descended upon North Carolina. We watched a little bit of Cletus McFarland's video. I think he's an awesome YouTuber. I think he takes aviation very seriously. When I watch his videos, I appreciate his commitment to safety, but he was going in some very, very confined spaces for the first time. And that's pretty dangerous stuff, especially in the mountains and stuff. What do you think about kind of how that works out and using that many helicopters for disaster relief? And how did it work out for you when you did Katrina?
Yeah. So first of all, my heart goes out to the people in those situations, and not simply for the people who are victims. I mean, that's a tragedy, a horrible tragedy. And many people have lost their lives, and thousands of more are currently in desperate need of assistance. The people providing the assistance as well, many of them are taking some pretty big chances. And I don't mean that in a dramatic way but when you're operating in those environments, it's much more difficult. And it's easy when you become fatigued. It's easy when you're under the pressure of human suffering, right? You think, well, if I don't get this food or water to the people, they're not going to have food or water or blankets or shelter, whatever it is. So first of all, thank you for all the people that are doing that. I was speaking with Mover and Gonky before the show. I had the privilege for Airbus again. I'm very proud of Airbus. We did not even publicize this, but when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, my boss at the time, Dell Livingston, called me. I was actually golfing. I'm not even a golfer, but I happened to be out golfing. And he called me and said, "Hey, Bruce, what do we have in the way of helicopters that we could send to New Orleans? There's a hurricane going to hit New Orleans." I'm like, well, we had a couple of ships in the hangar, some trainers. And he said, well, go ahead and get those ready and be ready to leave tomorrow. And I said, okay. He said, what do you need from me? I said, well, I don't really know yet. I mean, but off the top of my head, I said, why don't you get like $5,000 each? Frank Kanauka and I, we were the 2 pilots, and Bobby Hernandez was our mechanic. So it was myself, Frank, and Bobby. And I said, so get us $10,000 in cash. And because I don't know, I mean, how am I going to pay for stuff? How am I going to pay for fuel? So I met him the next day at the airport, Frank, myself, Dell. And our first problem was getting clearance into the place. So, of course, first we contacted the FAA. So, all these logistic things you don't think about, but I promise you, down in the Carolinas right now, there's somebody flying top cover. And if you don't have the code to get in, you're not going into the game. You just can't. Well, at least that's how it was for Katrina. So for Katrina, there were two, I think there were P3 Orions, but I could be wrong about the aircraft. But their call signs were Omaha 44 and Omaha 45. Those were the two aircraft. And when you got down, there was a big TFR over the area. Remember, this is 2005, so we'd already gone through 01. So you had to have a code to get in, and Omaha 44 and 45 gave you the code. So we contacted FEMA. FEMA wouldn't talk to us. All we wanted to do is know where to go to help. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, ultimately, a friend at the FAA, and I'm not going to say who, but a friend at the FAA gave us the frequencies for Omaha 44 and 45. So Frank left with one helicopter, and I forget where he went originally. I don't know. I don't remember where he went originally. And then I left Grand Prairie in another ship, and we met in Lafayette, Louisiana, and we started doing operations. We went from Lafayette on in. I think we started that first night at I-10 in the Causeway, which, wow. If you've ever been down there, there's about a 6-story round building kind of at the north. Mm-hmm. I haven't been down there since
Copeland Tower now, I think is what it's called now. Yeah.
So I'm flying a single engine helicopter, a VFR single engine helicopter. Frank's flying an IFR twin. Conveniently, he wasn't qualified to fly the single. I give him shit about that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm like, that's pretty convenient, Frank. He's up there in an IFR twin, moving the heading bug on the autopilot, and I'm back there pedaling. But anyway, I remember we so much, I think you can't realize until you're there. And I'm sure the people in North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, they're all going through this right now. Florida, is that there's coordination, but really, like I say, top cover only gets you into the game. Once you're in the game, you're on your own.
Yeah.
And it's why in New Orleans, and I forget the exact number. I believe we were the 7th and 8th helicopter to arrive in New Orleans subsequent to the hurricane. That's how soon we got there. And I remember the following morning when we went to the Superdome, they called it Eagle Base at the time. Again, I was never in the military, so we landed Eagle Base and the Superdome. And I walk in and there's a general there. I didn't know. I just said, "Hey, who's in charge?" And they're like, "Well, General yada yada." I'm like, "Well, may I speak with him?" And he came out and I talked to him and he says, "Well, who's paying you?" I said, "No one's paying us." He said, "What do you mean no one's paying you? Who do you work for?" I said, "I work for Eurocopter and we're here to help." He said, "Well, who do you work for?" I said, "Well, I guess I work for you. What do you need?" Seriously. And that's how it began. And, to this day, we left there. So we were down there, Frank and I and Bobby, for 8 days. And then we sent a whole nother crew. And I say a crew, like 2 motorhomes, probably 7 or 8 more pilots, 4 or 5 more helicopters for 2 more weeks.
Wow.
And you know what? That story has never been told.
Wow. What were you doing? Like, what were the missions?
So when we started, what we were doing was we were flying people off of I-10 in the Causeway. That's where we began. There's a funny story behind that too. But so we landed at I-10 in the Causeway and we're taking people. It was like Stephen King's The Langoliers. We land on this road and people are just standing along the side, like heads down, arms down, just standing there. And we're like, what's going on? So well, let me back up. That was the first place we worked that night was I-10 in the Causeway. So we left Lafayette, Louisiana, and we each had a full load of medicine and water and supplies. And then I had like 3 nurses and a doctor with me. And then Frank had like the same, I forget exactly what we each had, but, and we're going to I-10 in the Causeway. And our instructions were when we left Lafayette, they said, just go there. And remember, there's no lights. There's nothing. It's dark as a pit. And I'm not from New Orleans. I mean, I've been down there, but so anyway, we're navigating to I-10 in the Causeway. And the person who gave us a short brief, and the brief was go to I-10 in the Causeway. You'll see where it'll land when you get there. Just go there and you'll see. So we go. We get there. There's no other helicopters there. There's nothing there. We're like, where do we land? So we orbited a couple times. I was the lead ship, but I didn't have a slewable landing light. My landing lights were fixed. And I remember I came around once and that freaking 6-story building went down the side of my ship. I mean, it scared me to death because again, there's nothing lit, nothing.
Right.
So I climbed up and said, okay, Frank, you have a slewable landing light. You go in first. So he landed. I landed behind him. We shut down. We offloaded all of our stuff. And then here came the Blackhawks, like the militaries were sending ships too. And of course, they landed where we landed. But we didn't know we were in the right place. So it was a little bit the blind leading the blind. You know, we're down there and then they land and we're like, I guess we're all supposed to be here. I don't know. But so we flew several flights off of there. We were taking them to Tulane University. I'm sorry, not Tulane. LSU, the Pete Maravich Center. It's like their sports complex in Baton Rouge. So we'd land in Baton Rouge and it's kind of like a clown car. You know, all these people are jumping out of our helicopters. And yeah, I could tell stories about that forever. But I really give a lot of credit. And I think that the unfortunate thing is, you know, the only time we ever really spoke about it was when we got back after this. Mark Paganini was our president, a fantastic gentleman. He asked if I would give a presentation to our employees about what we did. And I did. I started it and I meant it. I said, you know, you can never know the help we, and I mean we all, provided to those people. And, you know, myself and Frank and Bobby, you know, we were able to see the thankfulness in people's eyes and the desperation and I know you can't feel that, but rest assured, you're as responsible for saving those people's misery as any other human, because without payroll, without, you know, human resources, without tech support, we couldn't do it. And I do mean that. And so there are right now, as we're speaking, this very moment, there are hundreds of people busting their ass to help people. Mm-hmm. And I cannot stress enough the respect I have for that. And, you know, that is Americans helping Americans, people helping people. And, you know, for the average citizen, and it's okay that this is the case, but, you know, an inexpensive helicopter is $3,000 an hour.
No such thing as an inexpensive helicopter.
You know, right. So when you see all those aircraft doing that, we're looking at tens of thousands of dollars being given. And that doesn't include, you know, of course, I have lots of friends who have fixed wing and, you know, a lot of our tech reps are pilots as well. And they're flying supplies. John Hubble and a group of people. John Hubble's one of our tech reps in Indiana, a wonderful human being. He's got like an RV 10 or something. I don't know airplanes. He's got an airplane and they're flying lots of supplies to Carolina. You know, there are a lot of people using their personal resources to help people that they'll never, ever know.
Yeah.
And it's a tough, so back a little more technical, it's really why, so 2005 during Katrina, we had still not won the Army Lakota helicopter program. In fact, we did the SSPD, the Source Selection Performance Demonstration, right after Katrina. Well, yeah, almost immediately after. So we had not won it, and it would have been a really good thing for us, you know, from a PR standpoint. We could have made a lot of hay by saying, hey, listen, look what we did for America, but we didn't.
Yeah.
Mark Paganini, I have a lot of respect for him. He said, listen, we did the right thing for the right reason. We're not going to sully it by trying to make profit from it. So anyway, ultimately we did win Lakota, but there were some lessons learned, and this is well known in the aviation helicopter community, that the Lakota, the need to have these tactical multi-band radios in all of the Lakotas was so that we didn't have the problems we had during Katrina. Because during Katrina, the Coast Guard couldn't talk to the Army, and the Army couldn't talk to none of us could talk to one another.
Wow.
So you've got all these helicopters flying, and I mean, I'm not exaggerating. Like for many days, we were flying people off of Tulane University, which is only maybe a mile as a crow flies, northeast of the Superdome is Tulane University. We'd take people off the roof of the parking garage at Tulane, and we'd take them out to Moisant or Louis Armstrong, Moisant Airport, drop them off. So we'd take passengers out, patients, and then we'd fly ammunition back in, quite honestly. I'd be flying boxes of ammunition back to Tulane and then patients out. And we were just doing that all day long.
Wow.
I mean, just all day long.
Wow.
And so, you know, I am sure that in many places in North Carolina, there are some people in desperate need, and it is wonderful. You know, a helicopter, Katrina was probably the first best use of a helicopter in the civil world, in that if you didn't have a helicopter, you were not getting in New Orleans. I mean, boats were poor at best. And I think this event in Asheville, and especially Asheville, where it's mountainous and lots of hills and hollows, and, you know, you just aren't going to move around without a helicopter. And so anyway,
that's awesome.
My heart goes out to those people.
Yeah. Well, it's always good to see the human spirit too.
Yeah.
Did you take any dogs? You take dogs and cats and pets?
You know what?
Stuff
So
out?
I'm not gonna make any friends saying this, but it is the truth. I refuse to take anything but a human. I wouldn't take your suitcase. I wouldn't take your purse. When you got on that ship, you had nothing. And I will confess, it was a tough. I love animals. I never flew anything other than a human being. And at Tulane was a good example. I had a person at Tulane insisted, you know, again, I'm not shutting down. I'm hitting the roof and you're throwing people on. I'm leaving. I mean, I'm just, I remember this man tried to get on board and he had a briefcase. And I said, no. And they said, no, it's just his briefcase. I said, no. I said, nothing but a human. I mean, nothing but a human. And, you know, the guy, I don't know, may have been the president of the hospital for all I know. All I know was I'm not taking anything. And people don't realize, you guys do. I was at the ragged edge of being able to fly. I'd get that ship hovering and I'd go to the knee wall on that hospital and I'd have to fall to get translation lift to fly away. And it wasn't just me. It was everybody.
Wow. Yeah.
So I'm not taking a 20-pound suitcase or briefcase because you need what's in it. And it was funny. So that guy, I'm sure he would have killed me had he had the opportunity. But about 4 hours later, guess what? There he was. No briefcase.
Yeah.
So he got on, but he wasn't getting on with that briefcase. I wouldn't take anything but a human. And it really, I'm sure there are some people that lost their best friend. And there's no time to explain this. I can't shut the ship down and say, listen, and nor would it be appropriate. Hey, listen, mover, I'm about 3 pounds from not being able to fly.
Yeah.
So
we all die if we try this.
Right.
Yeah.
So I would love to say that I did some. Yeah. It's one of the sad things. It's one of those decisions you make and you live with.
Well, let's segue to the comments and we'll talk mental health here. Thomas says we now have a new Airwolf team. Tomcats. So Gonky, as always, is Caitlin. Zippers Forever says flew the AS350 in customs, got to fly the 155 with the German Bundespolizei. I guess I need to learn German. When we considered it as a replacement for the UH-60, the 155 is a dream machine.
Yep. I've flown ILSs at 175 knots in a 155.
Holy crap.
Wow.
Below 4,000, V&E's 175 knots.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Smooth as glass.
Alec is a younger viewer. Mr. Bruce, is there a time that you've flown for hospitals that you've tried your hardest you could to save someone? I would imagine every time.
Yeah, well, yeah. If the question is, have I tried my hardest and they didn't survive? The answer to that would be yes, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I think, again, and this isn't the time or the place or the time, but I will say that, yeah, there are probably, for everyone who's flown medical helicopters, you have 4 or 5 times and they are heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And yeah, But there are also an equal number, hopefully more, where it's absolutely joyful, the result. So,
Right.
yeah.
Joe with the Airwolf patch. We always appreciate the Airwolf patch. Late joining. Are you an Airwolf fan, by the way? Is that something? Were
You know
an
what?
Airwolf guy or a Blue Thunder guy?
Sure. I was both, actually. So, Rob Scheider with the clock, right, with his watch. He was driving a Trans Am, though, not a Corvette, I think. Was that a Trans Am in that movie?
Oh, God.
Roy Scheider. Remember, he's in the parking
Yeah.
garage and he comes out?
I don't remember.
It wasn't a vet.
No,
it wasn't a vet.
For sure wasn't
Yeah.
a vet. I would remember that. But,
Yeah. And
help us out.
and then the Airwolf was a Deuce, obviously, a 222, and that was Jean Vincent.
Jan Michael Vincent. Yeah.
Jan Michael Vincent.
Yeah. And that was the thing we missed. So you worked with Kevin LaRosa, Sr.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We missed that whole
Kevin.
thing.
Hi, Kevin. I have my SAG card. I still have my SAG card. I keep it current.
What movies have you worked on?
Well, that's the most famous, The Fugitive, for sure. I still get residuals, just like Kevin. So we get residuals. So please go watch the movie. But honestly, we did a lot in Chicago. So if you're on screen, you're going to get residuals. If you're just flying the story or the camera ship, you're not. So most of my work was flying the camera ship, which is quite honestly what I love to do, is the camera ship. That's where the artistic, But Kevin and I worked on The Fugitive for several weeks. But many like Hoffa with Jack Nicholson and Danny DeVito, or Baby's Day Out with Jack Nicholson and Don Amici. And I don't know. It's been 40 years, 35
to your credit,
anyway.
To Airbus's credit, his favorite helicopter is the 350.
Yeah. I'll tell you what. Right. Yep. Not because I work for Airbus, but if you're going to, the 350 is, in my mind, the best not single engine, but the best single helicopter ever built. I mean, the ship it's certified in 1977 in the United States.
Wow.
I mean, it's almost 50 years old. And I tell you, it's just a little monster. And,
Fred North flies it, right? Fred North does the incredible stunt flying.
Yep.
Do you know him? Do you know Fred?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. Wow. Yeah. Had him on a podcast, actually. Yeah.
Did you really?
Yeah.
A small world.
Yeah. We've done some stuff together too a long time ago. So, again, that was a fun time in my life. I probably should have kept doing that. Again, I still keep my card current, but I haven't done any in a while. But Kevin LaRosa, top-notch guy.
Awesome.
Top-notch.
Ishinaga says, hi all, here's for Gonky. I'm an engineering student. Want to know, how do pilots see engineers? Do we know what we're doing? Should we listen to you more? Don't listen to Gonky for sure. Gonky doesn't. Go ahead, Gonky. I'm not going to answer for you. This is your question.
Well, obviously engineers have designed all these phenomenal helicopters and aircraft that we've talked about. So we have high regard for engineers and just engineering in general. But some things that are designed in airplanes, we always had a saying in the Navy, it's some engineer designed that, not a pilot. So, and usually that has to do with, an engineer, the way they think. A pilot thinks, operational engineer thinks more design. What do you think, Bruce? Same thing?
I couldn't agree more. Right. Some things make perfect sense. They just don't work.
I'll tell you what I love about the Airbus helicopters is that one switch that says on. Like I watched the guy, I went to a Grand Canyon tour and I watched the guy start it. And I'm like, that's it.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
I'll tell you, all of them either say off, idle, fly, or off. Yeah, they're all off, idle, fly now, I think, actually. So to start up any of the products, I shouldn't tell people this, it's true. Turn the red switch on, that's the battery. And the yellow switches, put them to fly. And it will be running.
It's Gonky proof.
Easy.
Gonky could start it. Neuropilot says it was General Jacqueline Van Ovost, U.S. Transcom, was 89th, which U.S. Transcom is the boss of one of our listeners.
Yeah. Well, tell her I said hello.
Yeah. Janitor is back. Whom does Mover talk to about getting Airbus to sponsor a remake of Airwolf?
Got it in.
Did they reach back out to you, by the way?
Not yet.
Okay.
No one is. We'll talk offline. Corvette World Rob says, Bruce, you flew the close shot of the Sears Tower.
Actually, you know, one of the ones I'm most proud of is the down shot. So when the movie opens, that's a nose mount shooting down, a nose mount shooting perfect verticals. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. And you know, at the time, and I'm not saying it was me, and I'm not saying it was Kevin, or maybe the combination of us or whoever, but remember that was Tommy Lee Jones, who's really a cool guy, by the way. And that's a whole nother story. He has a ranch out in West Texas. But at the time, Harrison Ford was not a helicopter pilot. And so he was very interested in helicopters. So, you know, after that movie, he became a helicopter pilot. So
Wow.
credit Kevin, credit us all. I don't know. But yeah. And I grew up flying in the Chicago area. So
Awesome.
Sears Tower is 1,500 feet, and most of us flew at 500. So we were a third of the way up it for most of it.
You said Megs. It made me sad because I grew up on Microsoft Flight Sim at Merrill C. Field until Daily bulldozed it. So
yeah.
All right. Well, to our final segment. We're sorry for keeping you a little long. Hope you still got a little bit of time. Mental health minute. So we on the show we think aviation and mental health kind of go hand in hand. And Bruce, I thought maybe it'd be appropriate to talk about just staying calm, because in aviation, one of the worst things you can do when things are going wrong is to panic, or as Gonky, like we talked about, no fast hands in the cockpit, right? Where you start just trying to do a bunch of things all at once. And really it applies in life. You know, when you talk about inadvertent into IMC or an emergency, the first thing they drill into your head in pilot training is maintain aircraft control, analyze the situation, take the proper action, land as soon as conditions permit. And in life, if you have that similar mantra, like, okay, something bad just happened, let's maintain control. I don't have to get angry. I need to assess whether it's something I even need to be mad about. I assess how bad this is. And then, okay, analyze it, take the appropriate, reasonable amount of action. Because how many times have you gone to a situation, you've lost your temper, and the next thing you're like, well, dude, I overreacted. If I'd have just waited for the data, this wouldn't have been a big deal. So in today's mental health minute, and I think it's important to talk about, is just bridging the gap between staying calm, maintaining your composure, and then not doing any rush decisions while you analyze what's going on. And that includes, you know, if life's not going well, if you're in a situation where you feel like you're going to hurt yourself or somebody else, or you need help, talk to a counselor, talk to a chaplain, talk to a military one source, call 911 if you have to. We'll come get you, and we'll take you to somebody that can help you. But, you know, don't make a temporary problem permanent. And Bruce, I'd like to hand it off to you, and then we'll let Gonky go. But Bruce, what do you have to say about that topic?
Well, so yeah, this is something that's very close to me. I had a very good friend, Gary Maddox. He flew HMX-1, and again, the best of the best of the best. And his daughter took her life on April 5th, 2019. And I can still hear him calling me because I was going to try to go visit her. I was in Lakeland, Florida, speaking at Fun and Son. She was in Miami. And anyway, without going into the details, she took her life. And yes, there's nothing. No one understands the pain that happens after that. And rest assured, if you're in that dark spot, get to the light. And I don't mean that religiously necessarily. I just mean hold on until the sun's up. You know, nothing looks as dark when the sun's shining. And then get to someone to speak to. And yeah, with respect to that calmness, you know, being calm is not a trait you're born with. Largely, being calm is a skill you train. And so, you know, I say often, when you're in an inadvertent IMC condition, when you're in any bad condition, whether it's an emergency, you know, a mechanical malfunction, something of that nature, you have to kind of force calmness. And, you know, some of that is just breathing, right? Take a deep breath, let it out. That's the first thing you do. The second thing is you do it again. The third thing is you do it again. Now, think about doing something. Resist that temptation to start throwing switches and manipulating the flight controls. get the ship stable and however you define that, get the ship stable, force calmness. Now, people will say, I say never, if you're low level and you're inadvertent IMC, do not pull in a bunch of power. People are like, well, we got to climb. And my answer to that is, tell me why. Do you got to climb? And people say, yeah, but you're near hitting a mountain. Let's say you're going up a box canyon. I'll say, well, you know what? If you're 200 feet AGL going up a box canyon and now you're inadvertent IMC and you got to climb, you killed yourself about 10 minutes ago when you chose to put yourself in that position. So my point is this: if you rapidly add power because you're behaving too quickly without calmness, you're likely have just killed yourself. Because when you add an egregious amount of a large amplitude of one flight control input, you have to compensate with the other ones. Don't do that. Just get your wings level, get level and relax. And you know what? It is possible you're going to hit something ahead of you. It's probably not going to happen. In the 10 seconds it takes to force calmness, add a little power, just a little. If you feel you need to climb a little, and start climbing a little. Don't get all wonky and start making these egregious flight control inputs, because honestly, the numbers, it's not just a number we pulled out of the air. 56 seconds later, if you behave in that rushed fashion, it's likely you'll be deceased. That's the statistics. So force calmness. And the last thing I want to say about that is it has to do with mental health, but not really mental health. But in a 160, everything that you do for normal operation is from your elbows and down. Nothing up here. Only startup and shutdown or emergencies up here. Startup, shutdown, emergencies. So if we're flying and you see my hand go up there, you should be going, what are you doing, Bruce? There's nothing up there for you. So we talk about safety, how inexpensive, it costs nothing to be clever.
Yeah.
So it helps us manage the cockpit, because we shouldn't be monkeying around with stuff up there unless there's an emergency. So anyway, but you know what? I've had a fantastic time with you gentlemen. I really have. Mental health, probably the most critical thing that has been brought up. Awesome. Please get help. If you're struggling, get help. There's no shame in it. Get help.
Gonky, what you got to add, sir?
Wow, way harder when you're third up.
Here, let me add Luna so that she can help you out with this. The Luna cam is active. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you guys, as usual, you hit all the highlights. But Bruce, I will say this: I think calmness can be taught, but like for you, having been an instructor, I can tell you have a calm demeanor. You have a very confident and calm demeanor. And I think as an instructor, that's a very valuable skill, because a lot of times I'm sure you can tell students will put you in scenarios where you want to be fast on the controls, but even in those scenarios, you have to maintain your composure. And I think being an instructor, I know for me, helped me a lot to not have those fast hands in the cockpit. And I think that's very valuable as a professional pilot, because I think we've all been too quick to determine what's going on and try to take some action, and then we promptly, in a simulator, kill ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. Or put the aircraft in even a more undesirable state. I know in military training, every high stress phase of flying, it was like Mover talked about flying formation, like learning how to tank. It's like, stop being so tense, just relax, be calm, wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes. And it works, and kind of like you spoke earlier in the show, it's like, why couldn't I do that yesterday? Right. So a lot of that being calm comes with just experience. So in that regard, it is a teachable skill and something that you can learn. So, if it's something, even in everyday life, I think it can be taught and learned as well. You guys touched on it, obviously, don't take, like you said, Bruce, go to the light, call a friend. Don't make a temporary problem a permanent one. But I think that's about all I have to add. Doug, what do you have to clean it up?
I'm honored that you guys think that I could add anything to that, but I'll try. It's going to sound like I stole it from John in the comments, because he was saying and thinking the same things that I do, that if you have the opportunity, think your way through or train your way through difficult scenarios ahead of time when you're not stressed, so that when you get to the stressful situation, and that doesn't only apply to flying or doing high risk stuff like that. It can be going to meet your boss if it comes to something like that. Just think your way through it. Don't get crazy with it, but think your way through. And then when you get there, hey, I trained for this, I'm ready for this, I thought about it. And physical and mental fitness in general, make sure you get enough sleep, make sure you're eating well, because then when you get in those situations, you've got your own resources to rely on. Bruce, you mentioned getting caught up in the stakes of a high stress mission, and I think that, to me, that kind of summarizes it. If you're ready for that ahead of time, and you're liable to get into those situations, you'll be okay. But if you're really thinking the world depends on this, it's going to make it worse, not better. And panicking under those conditions is just not the way to go. I've panicked, and I've never seen it lead anywhere good.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate that. And that's an awesome topic. It's always important to talk about mental health, I think, because your mind is your most important asset. And that's the first thing that you need to have working for you if things are going bad in an airplane or a helicopter. But anyway, moving on. Bruce, when's the book coming out, man? Because you got to write all these down.
That's true.
This has to be some kind of book or movie, something.
So I have a good friend. His name is Jay Miller, very famous photographer, writer. Anyway, fantastic guy. He's written all the X-planes, all of that. Jay Miller, look him up. He's incredible. In fact, I'm going to have lunch with him next week. Cool. So I was talking to him about writing a book. I'd written a few chapters, and he said, if you want to write a book, Bruce, go ahead, but realize it's only for you. No one reads books anymore. It's a little bit of a downer, but I'll tell you what, here's what's replaced. Here's what's replaced books. This.
Yeah.
They do both. They do both.
There are both, but you know what? The world has changed, and people really like podcasts have, taken over. A lot of people listen to these. I mean, this. That's why we're doing this. I'm not saying a book doesn't have value. I've contemplated. I've written 3 or 4 chapters, and I don't know. I often think it's really just kind of trivial and trite and doesn't have much value. So,
write 3 or 4 more,
right?
and then write 3 or 4 more. This is how I got Uber started.
Yeah. So maybe one day, but right now I'm happy doing what I'm doing, and I really do appreciate you for. I guess Luna's included in that, for not only Doug but Luna.
She's flown in helicopters. She's actually a really good. She'll tell you when you're in an unusual attitude. She'll let you know. She'll let you know.
She's cute.
Yeah, she's a therapy dog. She's a good dog. But so no, awesome. We appreciate you being here. And telling your story. I mean,
thank you both.
Us being your first. I mean,
yeah, that's pretty
awesome. It only goes up from here.
That's right. Exactly. We're like the launch pad for your
it only gets better.
Yeah.
We are amateur hour, but we appreciate it. I love what you're doing. Honestly, if nothing else, I mean, your stories are amazing. Yeah. I mean, I really think you need to write that book. And I've been, it's been a blast, but you've made me a fan of Airbus. Like, seriously, a company that'll do that. I mean, they need to know that you have, I'm like, wow, if it weren't for the fact that you got to use right pedal, I don't know if I can do that. That's kind of that and the metric system. The two things are my nemesis. I don't know if I can. I'm not an ambi-turner, Bruce. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. None of us are perfect.
Well, dude, they put a tray table in an airliner for pilots. So, I mean, they've got a lot of good ideas.
I tell you,
instead of a yoke, there's a tray table for your snacks. So
that's right. Yeah. So you don't spill your coffee on your FMS.
That's right. Exactly.
Your baguette and your coffee.
Yes.
All right. Well, sir, we appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah,
Anytime
Bruce,
you're
thank you.
welcome to come back. Please.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Thank you. The
Thanks for
pleasure's
joining
been
us
mine.
tonight. Yeah.
And as always, we thank everybody for coming. Oh, we got one more. Crazy Pete says, Mover, when's your science fiction book coming out? I want to read it. I'm working on the sequel before I do that. I don't know why.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out. But anyway, thank you all for listening and watching. We'll see you next week. Take care. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Night, folks.
Good night.